والصلاة والسلام على رسوله الكريم أما بعد. So we are on the third day here, inshallah. Today's sessions will be shorter than yesterday, inshallah. But nevertheless, they are still important. The two sections I'm hoping to cover today, with a possible third, but I'm going to try to cover at least two. One is going to be on the argument from morality. I'm going to talk about objective morality versus subjective morality and get into some details about that. The second thing that I'm going to try to cover is going to be a discussion on the Quran. And what we're going to look at is how to show that the Quran is from Allah without reference to the Arabic language. Okay, because one of the challenges that happens is someone will say, well, wait a minute, I don't speak Arabic, I don't know Arabic, and especially in the non-Muslim domain, that's one of the contentions. So how do I really know that the Quran is from Allah? So inshallah, we're going to dissect that and show that inshallah the Quran is indeed from Allah and that it's not necessary to have knowledge of the Arabic language. Now, that being the case, I'm also going to make a case to say that just because it's not necessary doesn't mean you shouldn't learn. But when we get there, we'll get there, inshallah. Okay, before I start, I know it's you guys have had some time since yesterday to let things marinate. We covered a lot from the philosophy of science to self-evident truths and all sorts of other things. Did anyone have any lingering questions from yesterday that they want to cover before we jump into today's topic? No? I thought you had a question. No? Okay, go for it.
Yesterday we were discussing the protocol of scientific benefit.
Yes.
And at least what I've heard people say is higher science and then better science.
Right.
And I think the idea again with the science stuff keeps changing, you can't tie it to science.
Right. Yes.
And then you were explaining that better off than talk about the Arabic.
Yes. Yes. Okay, I thought I spent a lot of time on that. Okay, fine. So one of the challenges when we use the word miracle. Okay, so let me start with that. When you say the word miracle in English, it has such a broad usage that it just doesn't give the phenomena itself justice in terms of the Islamic idea of what we're talking about. Okay, so if you think about the term miracle, someone may say, oh, the miracle of childbirth. Okay, but that's not, when we say miracle, that's not what we mean. We mean, yes, you have a natural occurrence of things, and in breaking that natural occurrence, that's what we would say, okay, that is what we call a miracle, right? So that's number one. So in terms of when, let's say, we are talking about the miracle of the Quran, what we're talking about and what in Arabic is known as ijaza, right? Or a mu'jiza. And that is different than the English equivalent of what we just, maybe in some sort of academic laziness, just say miracle, right? So what is a mu'jiza? It comes from the word ajaz, which means to incapacitate, right? So, and that's, you'll see this used in various contexts as well. It's used in the context of to incapacitate, meaning that the miracle comes as a challenge to the one that has gone against the claim of the prophet, right? Whatever prophet that may be. So we're talking about Musa alayhi salam or Isa alayhi salam, when they come with mu'jizat, right? Then those are challenges to the prevailing whatever it might be, right? So during the time Musa alayhi salam, they were magicians. He came with, the snake, right? The staff turning into the snake, and the magicians were able to recognize that immediately, right? That was a break from the natural occurrence of things, because magicians understood that there's a certain natural occurrence of how things happen, right? And this clearly wasn't that, okay? So that comes as a tahaddi, comes as a challenge. So when we say that the Quran is a scientific miracle, the problem that arises is that what we're saying, and this is what the claim that's made, is that science shows that the Quran is true. Why? Because how is it possible for the Prophet ﷺ to have known these scientific facts back then? That's generally how the That's generally how scientific miracles are conveyed. Now, I just mentioned a few problems, but there's actually a number of problems with this. Okay. The main thing that I mentioned is that when you are saying miracle, and if this is truly a challenge in this idea of, okay, how could the Prophet ﷺ have known it? The problem is that you are taking science as an absolute standard. And in yesterday's conversation, we said that science is mutable. Okay, it can never get you to 100%. That's the beauty of science, right? In fact, there was an ayah that I quoted in the khutbah, and I think that ayah kind of highlights this point because Allah says, "Sanurihim ayatina fil afaq wa fi anfusihim." We will show them our signs. And I mentioned in the khutbah, whenever you read that ayah, it's always okay. Science as a project, you are always discovering new things. And so it is a mutable endeavor. You're always open to discovery. The problem is if you take this mutable endeavor, right? It's shifting, you never get to 100% certainty, and you say that the Quran, which is absolute, this mutable thing is going to show this absolute thing to be true. It's a methodological, and then what I said yesterday, a methodological nightmare. Because as this shifts, as knowledge shifts, what happens to the original claim? Like, let's say this shows this, but now this is different. Okay, you've got a problem now, right? Because does that mean that the Quran is not wrong? Because the Quran is, somehow it's got a. So that's number one. Number two, in how this, and by the way, I mean, I know there's a lot of very famous du'at and scholars that expounded upon this, use this. Some of them we've spoken to directly, I'm not going to take names, but some of them very popular, right? The other thing that was kind of done in this environment of Quranic miracle or scientific miracles was that you, in certain cases, have to make, extreme linguistic gymnastics to get to something to match whatever is currently scientific in vogue, right? In vogue within science, okay? So for example, I think someone would say, look, the fact that Allah uses noor, and noor means reflected light. And in the case, Allah's comparing the moon and using noor, and he's using the term siraj, which is a burning lamp to refer to the sun. Okay. Now the idea that noor means reflected light, if you look at Arabic dictionaries, that doesn't come until much like maybe like a tertiary, not even tertiary, like a 7th, 8th definition, maybe, right? And then you have to say, okay, is this something that was classically understood? That's the first issue, is that you have to take a linguistic, you have to make a lot of linguistic assumptions. Number two, is it true that nobody before the Prophet ﷺ understood that the moon was the reflected light of the sun? That is not true, because you had many, and you're going all the way back to the Greeks, they understood that the moon was the reflected light of the sun. So the first thing, how could the Prophet ﷺ have known? You've got two problems there, right? So anyways, so it's very, it is a methodological nightmare to say the Quran is scientific miracles. Now, does that mean that we don't believe in science? We're just going to jettison the entire project? No. What it means is that we understand science's epistemic value. It has value, right? We're not supposed to not do science. But that being the case, we understand that its epistemic value is not at the level of the Quran. And so in order to say miracle, you have to basically do something else, which in this case would be the linguistic aspect of the Quran. Yeah, makes sense? So I hope that clarifies that point, inshallah. Okay, any other questions not related to Quran and science? Okay, let us begin in earnest then. So I'm going to go walk around a little bit. So what we're going to be talking about today, I'm going to try to move this without messing up everything, which I think I just did. All right. Good. Okay. Okay, so what are we going to be talking about in this section? Well, we're going to be looking at the argument for God's existence from objective morality. Okay. What we're going to be covering is we're going to look at certain key terms. What do we mean by objective morality versus subjective morality? All right, we're going to look at the nature of objective morality. We're going to present the argument, as we always do in some sort of deductive format, and then try to show that moral realism, the area of Proper's dilemma. I don't think I pronounced that correctly. Plato's dilemma, I think that's Tasleem as well. And we'll look at a few other aspects, Islamic perspective on objective morality, and then we'll also talk about morality from an epistemic point of view. What I mean by that is that what we're going to be talking about in this section has to do with what we call moral ontology. So if you were here on Friday, you know the difference between ontology and epistemology. Right? So ontology has to do with what exists. Epistemology has to do with how you know. So this is about ontology, like morals exist, why do they exist? Epistemology is how you know whether something is moral or immoral, right? The two different realms. So we'll get into that at the tail end as well. So let's start with some terms. One of those terms is metaethics. I touched upon this on day one. Anytime you see the term meta, it's referring to something that is foundational, like literally the ground, right? So we talk about meta language, metaphysics, meta ethics, whatever it might be, that's related to something being meta, it means it has to be something that has to have a foundation. I think on Friday I gave the example of meta language. So there are certain terms within which you understand the thing, right? Similarly, you have metaethics. In other words, you have ethics, which is the study of things that are moral and right and wrong. But what metaethics deals with is what are the foundations? In other words, why is something moral or immoral? Why do we say it's moral or immoral in the first place? If you think slavery is immoral, well, why? You can say it, you can make an assertion, you can feel it, oh my God, okay, fine. Why? And is that subjective or objective? Okay. So it focuses on morality itself, it refers to the foundations, nature, and scope of moral values. It tries to answer the following questions. Does morality even exist? Like we make moral claims, you should do this, you should do that, right? Abortion is right, abortion is wrong, whatever might be wrong. All right, moral realism. Okay, what moral realism says, now this is a school within philosophy. Moral realism basically says that moral properties are objective. In other words, when we think about morals, they're not subject to the. Okay, so therefore, if morals are mind independent, as we're going to see, we have to ask where do they come from? Moral anti-realism says that they're mind dependent, meaning I think of my own. Okay, these are two kind of areas. Finally, moral epistemology. Again, like I mentioned earlier, moral epistemology deals with what is good and what is bad. Okay, and then how do I know that? It's bad because I feel like it's bad. Does society determine that? Like, how do I know something is right and wrong? Okay. So now don't worry if the terms are a bit over the head. The concept is what's important. So what we're going to deal with next. I think our Imam's clicker is gone like mine. So all right. So consider this. This is like spinal surgery, I guess, right? That is someone, doctor, he kind of opens up a patient's spine, and he says, you know what, let me just cut the spine. All right. Now, what's the result of cutting someone's spine? The nerves. What happens? They're paralyzed. They're gone, right? Is that moral or immoral? If you just did it because then just cut it. Immoral? How many people say that's perfect? Anybody? Right? We can all agree it's immoral. Yes? Look, I know it's early in the morning, man. You know, it's early yesterday, it's late at night, it's early in the morning. So is it moral or immoral? Immoral. Okay, good. Now, the question is it objectively immoral or is it subjectively immoral? Okay, what do I mean? If we imagine that the whole world came together and said, you know what? That's okay. Would it make it moral for you? No. Okay. If the whole world came together and said, you know what, that's perfectly okay, would it be okay? No. Therefore, if it wouldn't be okay, what you're saying is that it is objectively immoral to do that. Meaning, it is not subject to other human beings. It is objective. It is not subject to limited mind and human emotion. It doesn't matter how you feel about it or how you don't feel about it. In terms of other people, it is objectively immoral to do that. Everyone understands the difference between subjective morality and objective morality now, right? Give a different example. If, like, let's say a newborn child is born, and you turn on the news, and the news report says this newborn child, came out as soon as the newborn child came out, the doctor just beheaded it. Moral, immoral. Immoral. If the whole world came together and said, no, that's okay. That's a good practice. Moral, immoral. Still immoral, right? So it's not subject to limited mind and human emotions. It doesn't matter what somebody else says about it or how they feel about it. It is objectively immoral. So the question is, if it's objectively immoral, why is it objectively immoral? How do you prove that is objectively immoral? So the argument, to put it very simply, let me see here. All right, hold on a second. The argument, to put it very simply, is that if you believe that there are things that are objectively moral or objectively immoral, you have to believe that God exists. Why? Otherwise, what is the moral anchor? You have to have something that transcends limited mind and human emotion. And what is that thing that's outside of limited mind and human emotion except God? Everyone understand the argument? So if objective morals exist, God exists. That's the simple argument. As simple as I can put it. Okay? If you say there are no objective morals, that's another issue. Okay? But if you say objective morals exist, you have to say God. There's no other meanings. You can't go anywhere else. Something outside of limited mind and human emotion. If you say it's based on limited mind and human emotion, they're subjective, and you don't believe objective. Okay? All right. So what do we mean by objective? Number one, they're mind independent. Okay? When you get into evolutionary moralism, which is another area, they say they're species independent. Doesn't have to do with a certain species, it's outside of that. Morality is not dependent based on one's mind or personal feelings, just like mathematical truths. So 1 + 1 is 2, it doesn't matter how you feel about it. It is objective, like 1 + 1 being 2 is objectively true. It doesn't matter whether you hate math, whether you love math, how you feel about the numbers 1 or 2, or whatever it might be, it doesn't matter. It is objectively true that 1 + 1 is equal, right? So, or there's certain scientific truths that you say are objectively true. The earth going around the sun are true because of how you feel about them. So therefore, these morals are in a sense outside of us. In other words, they're not in here, they have to exist outside of the human mind. As this, if you think about something tangible, for instance, you can actually touch it and feel it, it's outside of us. Okay, that's what we mean by being objective. So the question then arises, if they're objective, where do they come from? What is the nature of those morals? How do we know, right? Okay. So again, when we talk about proof, this is a metaphysical issue. It's not a scientific issue. Okay? Hope that I've hammered that home hard enough. Okay? This is not a scientific issue. It's not something that has anything to do with science. It's a metaphysical issue. In fact, most of the arguments, in fact, I would say all of the arguments that we present in this course, they're all metaphysical. Okay. So the issues of metaphysical ones mean we have to start with first principles, make sense of our philosophical intuitions and our perception of phenomena. Given our intuitions about the deliberate and unjustified snipping of a patient's spinal cord, we need to ground these intuitions. All right. Now, someone could say, I really believe that slavery is immoral, objectively immoral. But if you ask them why, what do you ground it in? How can you prove it's immoral? If they say, well, humanity says so. Okay. So if humanity tomorrow says it's okay, does that now mean that it's moral? Well, no, you can't say that. It's objectively immoral. But if that's the case, why? How do you ground that particular moral? What do you ground? Okay. All right. So there's a couple of points I need to make here to be academically honest. There are a couple of positions within Islamic theology on this question of morals. So again, just for academic honesty, we want to make sure that we're clear. We have academic transparency. So from the Ash'ari perspective, okay, that from the Ash'ari perspective, that nothing in the real is considered objectively moral. Now, what that means is, well, actually, hold on. Focuses on God's omnipotence. God's commands are not subject to anything. God can command effects to be good. The human intellect cannot discover moral values independent of revelation. In other words, something is good because Allah has commanded it. Okay, that's generally the Ash'ari position. If there's differences within that, then there may be differences in that. Okay, the Maturidi position is kind of like the Ash'ari position, but they say that the human intellect can discover some moral values independent of revelation. However, this would occur only by God creating that knowledge in a certain system. So, in a sense, they're a bit closer to that third position that I'm about to speak about, but in a sense, they're in between these two positions. All right, the last position, the Athari position, that there are some objective morals in the real world. The human intellect can discover these morals. God's power is subject to his will, which is a derivative of his nature. So let me just summarize that very quickly. The Athari position is the position we're using for this argument. Right? Again, I'm doing blatantly honest here, okay? And the thing is, if you go through the Quran, you kind of go through the Sira and things like that, it has a very strong basis. Okay, I'm just kind of mentioning this. In the sense that objective morals, if we were to say that objective morals are only based on the command of Allah, and we only know them through revelation, some questions arise. For instance, when we are trying to judge the prophethood of the Prophet, there have to be some morals that precede, in other words, people that don't know those morals from revelation, so that they can judge that, yes, the Prophet is indeed a moral person and he's a true prophet, right? If we simply say that commands, or rather, the only way we know morals is by revelation, you would have a certain, that would be a bit problematic from that perspective, the messenger, from the prophet of the Prophet. In addition to that, statements in the Quran, some of them are very general, in the sense that Allah says, be just. But that presupposes that justice is understood in some form of fashion, right? So, and this is, you'll see these in matters of fiqh as well. When you're trying to be just, if you open a classical book of fiqh, let's say that's written in the, during the Ottoman time period, in those classical books of fiqh, a woman could ask for a divorce if her husband did not provide her with enough coffee for the year. Because that is at that time was considered, okay, that's just. Now, in this day and age, maybe you need to provide more coffee, and that too, is elements, okay, whatever it might be. Point being is that our understanding of morals, there has to be something that precedes revelation in order for us to accept certain parts of revelation. Okay? So I find, now I'm not going to just say this, obviously, there's a lot of nuances that are outside the scope of this course, but this course, or this particular argument relies on the Ash'ari perspective. And in a second, in a little bit, we're going to get into the Ash'ari perspective in a little bit of detail because there's a certain contention that arises where someone will say, is good. Well, anyways, we'll get there. Okay. All right. Let's move on. Skip that. This is the basis of the argument. Once again, objective worlds exist. God must exist. Objective worlds exist. Therefore, God exists. Any questions about the structure of God? Any questions about how to articulate argument? What is an objective world? What's an objective world?
Something that you said you don't think it's moral.
Okay, so why do we say it's objective?
Why subjective?
Yeah, well, like, are all worlds objective? No. What's the difference between objective and subjective?
Subjective moral, somebody else will say that it's not, it's okay.
Okay, all right. Okay, all right. Want to add to that? Perfect. Not limited by human opinion and emotion, right? In other words, it's not the word itself tells you it's subjective. It's not subject to anything, right? It's an object here. It's objective from that perspective. Okay. All right. So why do we say that? Why is this argument true? The morals we consider to be objective are so because God exists, right? God provides the foundation because he's external to the universe and transcends human subjectivity. Okay? God is the only being that's outside of the universe and outside of limited mind and human subjectivity. So he is the objective source. He's the moral anchor. Once you take that away, you have a bunch of problems that we talked about yesterday, right? If you remember, how do you assign humans value if you don't have an objective source that transcends the mind and emotion? You can't have a discussion about human rights, right? Because the assumption is these human rights are objective, right? That's how they portray it, right? Like you Muslims, you haven't signed on to the Declaration of Human Rights. Certain countries didn't do that. Why? Because we said, well, there's certain things that we don't accept. Those countries said, right? For instance, LGBTQ rights. That's something that we're not, in our country, we don't want to have. You are denying human rights. And it's made in such a sense to say, okay, it's objectively true that these are human rights. Okay? So if someone says that this is objectively true, you can push back and say, what makes it objectively true? Is it not just subject to your personal opinion and culture and time and place? Because if it's objectively true and the whole world should do this, what is the grounding? What is the thing you're relying on that's outside of limited mind and human emotion to give it a moral anchor? If you ask us as Muslims, we're saying, yes, our morals can be grounded in something limited mind and emotion, and that is Allah. But if you jettison all of that, get rid of all of that, you can make a claim of objective moral, right? So, there's an interesting quote here. Professor Ian Mark explains, God explains the mysterious ought pressing down our lives, and God explains the universal nature of the moral claim. As God is outside the world, God the Creator can be both external and make universal commands. Okay. So I think we went over this yesterday. All right. So we talked about the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is maximally perfect in all of his names and attributes, such that there's no deficiency in any of his other names and attributes. All right. We spent a lot of time on this yesterday. So one of the names of Allah is that he's al-Bar, which means he is maximally perfect in his goodness. The nature of Allah is good. Okay, and when we get into the discussion of is something good because Allah commands it, or does God only command good? There's a sort of dilemma that arises. This will become very important. Is the nature of Allah, can you abstract that? No, because that's his nature. If he says he's Allah, by nature, he's good. Like I said, this will become very important. So when God makes a moral command, it's a derivative of his will, and his will does not contradict his nature. Okay. Therefore, what God commands is good because He is good, and He defines what good is. In other words, you're not going to separate good as something outside of Allah. Okay? Why? Because good is His nature. That's who He is. Therefore, whatever He commands will be good. All right? There are two things that are, you can say, you cannot separate the two: the nature and the will and the command by extension. Everyone clear on this point? I see some people that are lost. Are you clear on this? Okay. Not saying that you're lost, just making sure. Okay. Someone grab a water bottle and get a chance or something like that. All right. In free throw's dilemma. So the atheist will come to you and say, look, man, there's a problem. This whole objective morality thing that you have. Are you saying is something morally good because God commands it? Or does God command only that which is morally good? Why is this a problem? Because if you say that God, something is morally good because God commands it, well, then you can't say that that morals are objective, because good and evil are arbitrary standards because God command anything. So God command in certain cases shirk to be okay. He command, whatever, like, he command the cutting off of the newborn baby's head to be okay. This becomes a bit problematic, right? So good and evil, so you have what's known as the arbitrariness order, okay? Or, so either you're gonna say that morality is defined by God's commands, something is good because God commands it, God command anything to be good. Like I said, and shirk to be good, and whatever, like, whatever you can think about, the worst crime you can think about, He command all that to be good, and therefore they will be good, right? On the other hand, if we say that God only commands the good, then you're saying that good is outside of Allah, and Allah is bound to only command that thing. You see the problem, right? So you've got a problem now. So does God command something because it's morally good? Or does God only command it, or whatever God commands is morally good? All right? So how do you solve this issue, this quote-unquote dilemma? It goes back to the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Like I just mentioned, there's a third possibility, and that is that God, by His nature, is good. He is al-bar, and you don't separate His nature from His will. So therefore, there's a third alternative. By the way, it's a really good book if anyone wants to get it and read it. It's called the Quran and the Second Quran. Anyway, he said there's a third possibility. The author here of there's a third alternative. A morally stable God of the kind found in Scripture, a supreme being who will not arbitrarily change His mind about the goodness of compassion and the evil of sexual misconduct. Such a God always commands good because His character and nature are good. There's a third possibility now, which is just it's ignored in trying to set up a apparent contradiction between the two. Okay? Any questions about this? When people, yes. Okay.
Where I said God tells us basically the belief God is I understand the nature.
Yeah.
But then what is morally good and bad?
Sure.
That is
Sure. So there is a course that we are about to publish, inshallah, on Good.By. And in that course, we actually go through the constitution of the human being, anthropology, that section. So one of the things is we know good and evil by way of our fitra. But the fitra is confirmed by way of revelation. And you can refer to this, like there's a, if you're interested, you can look up the tafsir of a very famous ayat, right? Allah nuru samawati wal ard. The end of that ayat, it says, Nurun ala nur. The nur of revelation coupled with the nur that is in the fitra. So we have a sense of morals that is built inside of us. But then for the atheist, even that, where does that come from? Where does the fitra come from? For us, we say, right? Allah created us on the fitrah. That's what we created human being on. So even those morals, they come from Allah. Our understanding of that. How they're confirmed is by way of revelation, right? And this is why it's very interesting. When you look at the Quran, you'll see that a lot of times the language that's used is transactionatory language. What do I mean by that? Like related to financial transactions. Okay, so for instance, in Surah Al-Saf, هل أدلكم على تجارة أن تنجيكم من عذاب أليم? Should I not tell you of a transaction that will save you from the hellfire? Tijara, okay? In other places, bay'ah, tijara, all these terms are used. Why does Allah use financial? Because the thing is, when we do financial transactions, whatever the person's worldview is, we have a somewhat understanding of what's fair, what's not fair. It doesn't matter whether they're atheist or Jew or Christian or whatever, it could be anything, agnostic. We can do financial transactions with them. What allows us to do that is a sense of what is just and what is unjust, what is moral, what is immoral, in this particular financial transaction. That's what's built inside of human being, right? So coming back to objective morals, the problem arises that if you take God out of the picture, you can't even establish the first part of morals being part of the human being. Because then how do you prove them? Yeah. Sure. No, go ahead. Sure.
Taking a given life.
Yeah.
Inside every one of us, yes, it's definitely.
Sure. Yep.
But then, like man of war, when a mother of life.
Yep. Yep.
Or where other circumstances, like the gospel that you have, the ultimate.
Sure.
Things are different.
Sure.
That's like a different model, which is that innate objective aspect of things.
Sure.
That model thing.
So here's the thing. What I was saying about okay. Yes, we have an intuitive sense of what's moral, but that's either confirmed or denied by revelation. Okay. Because the thing is, we could have a certain moral intuition, or we feel like it's moral intuition, but it is the effect of the environment upon it. Because remember, the Prophet said in the hadith we mentioned earlier that every child is born upon the fitrah. It is his parents that make you a Jew, a Christian, or an Asian, right? In other words, your environment has an impact on your life. Okay, and that's true even until today. There are certain concepts, certain things that we find morally like discomforting. For instance, one thing that a lot of people find uncomfortable is the fact that the Prophet married Aisha at the age of 6 and he married at 9. Okay, if someone asked you and say, "Did you give your daughter at 6?" and you'd be like, "No, I would never do that." Right? That's morally, like, I can't bring myself. Right? But is that really because it's immoral objectively, or is that because culture, society, environment has had that impact upon our fitrah such that that's what we're deeming? And then how do we know if it's true? Revelation. So revelation clarifies: is this truly something that's based upon the fitrah, or is it something that has to do with the influences that are around? That I think such and such is moral thing. Okay. And by the way, well, no, I'm not holding that. And it was lost just yet. So, okay. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. Yes. And just really quick, so the Ash'ari perspective is actually part of the it's the arbitrariness one. So if you want to look at the various schools of theology, this is the Ash'ari support, this is the Mu'tazila one, right? So if you are interested in Islamic philosophy and things like that, Islamic theology, you can make that distinction. But point being, in whatever school of thought you kind of follow, nobody does it anymore. Whatever school of thought you follow, the idea of objective morality is pretty clear on like I said, in order to understand whether something is just or unjust, you have to have something that precedes revelation to give a judgment for it, right? That can be corrupted. The fitrah can have an impact, but by and large, we understand people have a general sense, right? That's like I mentioned financial transactions. And the fact that Allah uses that. Okay, any other questions so far?
Yeah. But the world revelation, isn't that a contradiction?
No, they're saying that there's no way for the human being to get to understand roles except by revelation. Right? So the only way you know something is good or bad is by way of revelation. So it's not that the point is that it could be subjective in the sense that they're not absolute in a certain way, right? So it's just based on whatever God wills. And so there's no way for the human being to recognize their objective nature, right? That's where the problem arises. Because if you say that God, whatever God commands is good, potentially you can command a lot of things that we find, let's say by way of our creation, wrong, for that to be good, right? And it becomes problematic because then it's just, like we said, it's arbitrary. It becomes just something like, because God just, bored and just does this, whatever it might be, which contradicts a lot of other aspects of the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, any other questions? Yeah. You were here on Friday, right? Because we did a deep dive on the fitbar as much as this course allows, right? So we spoke about that. We said that every human is born upon the fitbar. We defined it, we said it's the original normative disposition. We looked at each term, original, normative, and disposition. And then we spoke about how the fitbar can influence, but it cannot be replaced, right? So influence can have an effect on the fitbar, right? That way, so we said that fitbar can be, for instance, clouded over, right? In like the external factors that influence it. How do you get the fitbar back to its original state in a sense? That goes through a number of different processes. We had a diagram that showed the heart and the fitbar in it, and all these different ways you can uncloud it, right? So we talked about the Quran being a way to uncloud the fitbar, so on, good character, revelation and spiritual practice, things like that. So if you're saying, is it molded? I don't know, are you talking about in a physical way, or what do you mean molded? Yeah. Yes. Yes. Yes.
But then the upbringing.
Yeah.
What I mean by molding is an upbringing of a human.
Yeah.
Whether he's living in an Amazon jungle or he's living in a country.
Sure. Sure.
It all depends where that nutrition is.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
So, and that basically divides us in many different.
Sure. Different worldviews. Yeah. Yep. Yeah, absolutely. But the thing is, a person can always return back to it. That's when people come to Islam, it's that original fiqh that attracts them to Islam. Like you don't see the phenomena of like conversion like you see in other worldviews, right? But why? Well, because it goes back to the natural base state of it, right? And the fact that the base state in and of itself is good, even it solves a lot of philosophical issues. Okay? Meaning that if it wasn't good, let's say if it was evil, right, which certain people contend, like Christians mentioned that, like original sin. If it was evil, then you've got a problem, is then how do you recognize good as good in the first place? Right, that's number one. Number two, you don't see that in terms of your interaction with the world around you. I'll give you a quick example, make it as quick as possible. So some years ago, I was invited to Oklahoma. One person. Okay, they have really good Moroccan tea there. Nobody knows what's going on in Morocco. Okay. Anyway, so I was in Oklahoma and I finished the Jummah khutbah and I got off the minbar and the imam of the masjid says, "Look, man, you're into this dawah stuff, right?" So I was like, "Yeah, I guess." He's like, "Well, there's a lady in my office and I want you to have a conversation. She's asking about stuff." So now I'm like, "Okay, I don't mind." So I get off the minbar. I was visiting for a course there or whatever it was. And so she's in the office, and the second I open the door to the office, the first thing she tells me, she says, "I've heard in your religion that your prophet slaughtered 900 Jews, or sorry, 700 Jews, something like 500 Jews, whatever number she gave." She doesn't say hi, hello, how are you? first thing she says, all right, so since I'm supposed to make this interactive, what should I do with this? How do I deal with this? So we think, how should I do this? What's your source? Okay, anybody else? Yes. Christian is not okay. Like you talk about us, what about you? Okay. What else? Yeah. Okay. Good morning. Hello. How are you? Right. None of the sisters. No input here. It was a lady, by the way. So nothing. Okay. So I went with good morning. How are you? As it was good morning. I was like, if you don't mind, let's sit down and let me get you some tea. Right? Like I said, I really want tea. Anyways, so let me get you some tea. Let's sit down and have a conversation, right? We sat down and I asked her about her family, where she's from, where she's brought up, only because in those situations, the gut reaction is to answer that question for whatever reason, right? Maybe it's out of love for the process of them. It's something you actually say, well, what do you need? Right? Like, how can you possibly, what's your choice? Because intuitively, alhamdulillah, we have a love for the process, right? We have a love for the deen, we have izzah for the, so you want your gut reaction to say, you know what? Either what's your source or you know what? Y'all did a whole bunch of other stuff to us, right? That's the gut reaction. But in a Dawah scenario, you have to go against that reaction, most cases, right? And you have to say, hold on a second, I need to calm down and I have to show the character first of our deen, right? Because if I just do what she's doing, then almost we're like competing jahiliyyah here, right? Like you're lacking what's known as him. So him is not letting someone push your buttons. Okay, that's why the Prophet was described kind of Ahlam nas. He was the one that had the most him. Okay. But anyways, I walk in, having a conversation. I said, so if you don't mind me asking, what's your background? She said, I'm a Christian, I believe in the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, and all these things. Okay, so now she tells me this. How should I take the conversation now? He says, I believe in the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Now, about myself, okay, about Islam, okay, fair enough. Yes. What brought her to the masjid? Okay, good. Anybody else? Oh, yes, sir. Okay, right. Isa Islam. How do we do Isa Islam? Okay, good. Anybody else? She said, I believe in the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. What should I say then? Yeah. Find common ground. Yes. I know what the sister mentioned, right? Find common ground. Okay. So we find common ground and you believe Jesus. What do we do then? Okay, have a good day. Bye. Like, what's next? After we find the common ground.
Where did she get that idea of really the prophet is the way he is?
Okay, so you're still on the first question. Okay, all right. So the point what I'm trying to mention is put that on part for a moment. Okay. One thing you have to realize in a Dawah scenario, you are not required to answer every single question someone throws in. Allah's not going to hold you accountable. Okay? Because let's say you clarify it. And she's like, oh, now I see. Okay, so this incident, the Badr Nadir, they had this problem, they reneged on the contract, the process set up, they knew that punishment was coming, the process himself didn't do it, he had someone else who was either no, you explain the whole thing to them, they say, oh, okay, that makes sense. Have a nice day, and they leave. On the day of judgment, is that the thing that was saving them from the hellfire? No. What's going to save them from the hellfire? La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. If you didn't give them La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, what have you done? You clarified the misconception and then that's it. But does that have much value? I'll take it done. And that's true for any question, most questions you're gonna get. Why do you wear a hijab? Like if someone asks you, sister, why do you wear a hijab? What are you gonna tell them? Anyway, help me out. Because Allah said so. That is the right answer. I cannot tell you how many times I had this question and a non-Muslim asks a Muslim, a sister, and she said, "Oh, because of modesty." And I'm like, the person you're talking to, especially if she's a woman, she might take offense to that. Right? Be modest. Right? How dare you? Right? And in essence, that's not why you wear it anyways. I was talking to my wife, and I said, if Allah had not commanded you to wear hijab, you wear it. She said, no way. Right? The only reason I wear it is because Allah has commanded. Okay. Anyways, let's come back to my story that I didn't want to the topic. So there's a number of ways we can go about this. What I did was I actually talked about the fiqh. That's why I'm bringing this up. Okay. What I told her, I said, look, from what I know about Christian theology, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that you have a certain belief. If you mentioned Jesus, you have a certain belief in the original sin. Is that correct? He said, yes, absolutely. I said, okay. And because of that belief in the original sin, Jesus has come now and died for your sins to take care of that original sin. She said, yes. I'm not saying this is correct or incorrect. I'm going to tell you what I believe. And I just hear me out. I said, okay. I said, look, we don't believe in original sin. I said, we believe in something called the fiqh. And according to that, when Adam ate from the tree, God, because he is maximally perfect in his mercy, there's nothing that is beyond Allah's mercy, he forgave Adam. In fact, he taught Adam how to ask for forgiveness. Right? He gave not only, he's not just gave it, he did how to ask for forgiveness. And so, from our worldview, our theology, we don't believe in original sin. We believe in original goodness. And my assumption about every single human being, including you, is that you, at your core, you are good. That's an assumption that every Muslim has to have about every person. If you believe that everyone is born on the fitrah, you believe everyone is born on goodness. Okay? So I said, let me ask you a question. Do you give charity? She said, yeah, of course I give charity. How do you feel when you give charity? Well, I feel good. I said, if you think about original sin, and the base state of a human being is sin and evil, when you give charity, you should feel rotten. Because what is it? You just gave someone money for nothing. In a kind of very clinical utilitarian worldview, getting nothing from that transaction. And so if your base state is evil, you should feel wrong. But you don't. You feel good. Why do you feel good? Because you have a good. So why did I mention that? Is because taking it from an abstract discussion about who Isa is, the Trinity is wrong, blah, 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 I wanted to take something that she personally experiences. I said, when you see a newborn child, what is the assumption? You don't look at that child and say, that's in fact. Right? You look at that child and look at that poor, the innocent child. If anything happened to that child, it's innocent, it's good, it's pure. Right? She's like, yeah. To make the long story short, by the end of the conversation, she was actually in tears. She took a shot. I'm doing that, right? So now I'm on the plane on the way home, okay, looking out the window, and something occurred to me. You guess what occurred to me? I didn't answer the first question, right? Like I didn't answer the first question. But here's the thing: we talk about worldviews. The lenses by which she's looking at the topic now, when she goes to the Sira, are the appropriate lenses. Because now the lenses she's looking at the Sira is what? Allah exists. Allah is the only one worthy of worship. The Prophet says someone's a true prophet. Now, when she looks at that particular event in the Sira, okay, now it makes sense. Make sense? So, the fiqh is very, very important. That's basically what my point was. And the point was, your understanding of the fiqh, your experience with the fiqh is something that's revelation. Really rough. Right? That's what I was trying to get home and relate to your question as well. Okay, moving on. So we talked about that, All right, response further explained. Skip that. Are there any alternatives to objective morals? Because you go to an atheist and say, well, you know what? Like this is objective morality. If you believe that objective morals exist, therefore God exists. Do you think they'll be like, oh yes, that's true. Okay. So is that how that works? No, you're always going to get contentions. So what are some of the contentions? One of the contentions is biology. Our objective morals come from biology. Okay. Interesting statement from Charles Darwin himself, that if you say that objective morals come from biology, like biological reality, he said if men were reared under precisely the same conditions as hive bees, there can hardly be a doubt that our unmarried females would, like our worker bees, think it a sacred duty to kill their brothers, and mothers would strive to kill their fertile daughters, and no one would think of interfering. If morals were derived from, let's say, the animal kingdom, to make it very blunt, right? Most of those morals you can follow. That's why when you have this, I think it's very problematic. You have people from the that make the argument for the LGBTQ stuff and say, look, in the animal kingdom, this exists, that exists, and so forth. You have to stop and say, are we deriving morals from biology? Is that where we get objective morality? Because if we did, we live in a very different world. There's a type of shark. It's called a nurse shark. It wrestles with its mate. Okay. Here I'm talking about wrestles. It forcefully puts itself upon its mate. If we took that example, rape in society would be perfectly okay. Right? So can we really say that biology is a source of objective morals? Very problematic. Charles Darwin himself has a problem with it. So one issue is that we would never act upon that. But the second issue is that when we say something is objective, it's not subject to anything. In this case, we're saying it's subject to biological change. So it still renders the world subjective. Yeah, it's not subjective to human, limited mind, human emotion, but it's subject to biological change itself, which still renders it subjective, right? The other aspect is in moral meaning. One of the aspects of a moral is that you're duty bound to it. What causes us to be duty bound to a moral that comes from biology? In other words, what's the point of saying compassion is good if you don't have to be, or justice is good, but you don't have to be just? The aspect of being duty bound, you don't get that in the animal kingdom. That's not something you get from biology. So it doesn't have any moral meaning. And then, like I already mentioned, it's subject to biological conditions that shape the evolution of our species anyways. That biological change over time. Now you're saying it's subject to biological change, yet it's still subjective, right? Does it make sense why biology is a problem? What if somebody says, all right, social pressure? I mean, right off the bat, I go against the definition. Because if it's subject to human beings and it's just social pressure, then they're not objective force anymore. Okay. And you can take many examples of that. All right. The Uyghur genocide. You can say that's perfectly normal, right? Because the majority or the society considers that perfectly okay. Right. I'm going to take another example, Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany, the people in society generally accepted it. Okay, it's fine to go and kill Jews, right? No problem. If social pressure defines morals, then they cease being objective. They're subject to people in the first place. So social pressure is not even objective. They're still subjective. So far, so good? Okay. Any questions yet? Okay. Moral realism. This is the one they're looking. Okay. All right. So moral realists, to summarize the point, they say objective morals just exist. We don't need to do basic. They're just there. Okay. Now, the problem is that you're still left with the ontological question. Okay, it's just there. Why am I duty bound to it? Why should I care? They're just there. And then where do they come from? Like, you're not giving an explanation of their objective nature. In other words, if they're just there, what makes them objective in the first place? Then you can just say they're just morals. There's no concept of objective versus subject. Okay? So, and this is what I mentioned earlier, morality is not limited to just recognizing the truth of compassion or justice. Morality entails a sense of duty or obligation. We are obligated to be compassionate and just. If you say that they're just there, where is the obligation? Where is the duty that you're bound to this particular moral if they just exist? Okay? All right, so under moral realism, such obligations are impossible because recognizing that a certain moral truth is objective does nothing more to ensure that we are obligated to the moral truth. All right? The last point is interesting, that is that moral duties are generally owed. You owe a moral duty to something or someone, right? Someone does something for you, you owe, okay, fair enough. Morals in and of themselves, objective morals, there's a sense of, okay, something is owed. But if you just they exist, who are they owed to? Okay, this goes back to, I'm not sure, can't one either. It goes back to the concept of need. Okay? The idea that we have this inner fifthly understanding of obligations, right? There's an interesting book called Debt, the First 5,000 Years. And the author goes into why do we feel indebted? Right? He's got a real problem with it. And again, maybe, maybe he's on that teeter-tottering on a piece of theism. So he's got the real problem with, okay, so why should we feel indebted in the first place? Because that feeling of indebtedness has basically killed off many countries. Because the IMF uses that in their favor, right? They go into these countries, give them loans, and they're not able to pay it. And so why do we should do away with this feeling of debt and indebtedness, right? Which leads to a whole bunch of other philosophical problems. The point is, when you talk about moral obligations, and if you're not duty bound, or you're rather, if they have to owe to something, who are they owed to? If they just exist, they're just floating up there. There's no sort of moral name. Okay. Now we need to talk about objective versus absolute. Any Batman fans? Nobody. But you know what I did? One guy. I don't believe that. All right, there we go. Two. Don't worry, I won't tell you. Okay. So one of my issues with Batman is that he confuses objective and absolute morality. All right, how so? One of his kind of core beliefs or rules that he doesn't break for himself is that he will never kill anyone. All right. Now we're going to put the recent foray Justice League on the side. Okay. So, anyways, Batman doesn't kill anyone, no matter what. Doesn't kill Joker. Doesn't kill nobody. It doesn't matter what the crime is. He will not kill someone. That is not in his view. Why? Because killing is wrong. Now the issue is that he's conflating two things. Something that is objectively moral with something that's absolutely moral. If you say that, look, in a certain situation, like let's say a robber is in your house, and you say that killing is objectively immoral, when the robber comes in, he's about to kill you, and you kill him first. Isn't that, are you not, how is that? Haven't you gone against objective morality? But the problem is that they misunderstood and conflated objective morality with absolute morality. Because objective morals can still be context sensitive. Something is objectively moral. In that situation, what's objectively moral is for you to defend yourself. In fact, if you did the opposite, that would be considered moral. Let the guy come in, take your kids, do whatever, buy whatever it is. You didn't. So the point is, there's a difference between absolute morals and objective morals. Objective morals, they can be context sensitive. Okay, that doesn't mean they don't cease being objective. But if you say that no, killing is wrong no matter what, that's not, we're talking about objective now, we're talking about absolute. And absolute becomes a certain problem. So this conflates absolute morality with objective morality. They're very different. Absolute morality entails that a moral act is good or bad, regardless of the situation. Okay? Objective morality, however, readily acknowledges the context sensitivity of some moral facts. Okay? And that may go back to your question about other areas where we say that killing is justified, right? So there's balloon punishment, things like that. Right? Again, it doesn't lack objectivity in that case, but it goes against something absolutely wrong. Yeah. But then you conflated two different concepts, make up two different concepts. Okay. Now, the last one here is someone just rejects objectivity completely. It's a loss, there is no objective. All morals are subjective. Okay. So how do we deal with that? We're going to start reading the slides. Someone says, you know what? Yeah. Exactly. Like then don't make any moral claims. Don't make a moral claim against Islam, that's for sure. Your problem with the marriage age of the Prophet or of Aisha, and make that moral claim. You know, men shouldn't have more wives, and make that moral claim, right? You cannot critique Islam at all. So that goes out the window. But let's further that. You can't say anything about the KKK, Nazi Germany, anything. What moral claim? Because if you say that it's subjectively moral, you're saying it's for opinion then. It's just objective. So if you say that objective morals don't exist, you've got a serious issue because you can never make any moral claim. If it's just subjective, it's just open to opinion. So you see that you have to at least admit some morals are objective to have some sort of opinion about something, right? Even this becomes a problem. But going back to what we start off with, if you admit that there are objective morals, and the moral anchor has to be outside of the mind of human emotion, then you have to admit that there has to be a God, right? There has to be a moral anchor for that. Okay, so either way, you got to take a choice. If you say there's no objective morals, alas, you can't make any sort of moral claim of any kind. If you say there are objective morals, you have to say there's God. Yeah. Like me personally. And probably a baseball bat. I don't know, man. I mean, right. Objectively moral. You tell me, what do you think? Right? Anyone think it wouldn't be? Like you should like, you know what? You wanna take my wife, my kids, and those seven. Then that's moral. What's moral say, wait a second, you're not touching anyone here, right? So again, but someone says, okay, I'm not gonna deal with killing, and I'm a pacifist, I believe in peace, I will never hurt anyone, I will lie. Okay, fair enough, but then that's an absolute moral now. It's not objective. So, okay. Any questions so far? So we talked about someone who rejects objectivity. Yeah.
If someone maintains that all is objective and just believes that a group is agree upon subjective and criticize another group that has okay, so in a Western country that believes we set up subjective
Sure.
we criticize other groups.
Okay, but then what's the basis of the criticism? Philosophically. Just might is right, power is right. Yeah, let them say that. You're like, okay. When we come back, when Islam rises again, don't worry about it. Right? Like, we'll get there, then you stick with your subjective morals, right? What I've noticed is that most people won't take that claim to thought. Right? They may state it because they want to get out of the situation of saying that God exists, but only because they want to get out of the situation. They would never enact that, or they don't actually believe that in this real way. It's very difficult to do so anyway, because then all morals are subjective. I mean, you have a really hard time to have any conversation with anyone. Any other questions? So how many people have understood the argument? Raise your hands. Okay, the rest of y'all have been chilling. Okay, all right. Maybe you need time for it to sink in, right? You say that? For those of you who didn't raise your hands? Okay. All right. Let's get to moral epistemology. So remember, we said what we've been talking about so far is moral ontology. What is the anchor for your morals? Why do they exist? How do you why are they so? Why are they there in the first place? Moral epistemology, however, talks about how do you know whether something is moral or is not moral. Okay, this is why you have to be just a bit careful when you're talking about these terms. All right, what we're talking about, how do we know what is good? The ontological basis for objective morals are God's commands. Therefore, finding out what He commands are to facilitate moral knowledge. The thing is, and again, we kind of touched upon this when we were talking about Nurun ala nur, right? Light upon light, revelation. So you have an understanding by way of your fiqh, generally things are good, but then revelation comes and you confirm or denies it. Right? So how do we know what is good, what is not good? There's a general kind of fiqh understanding of that. And how do you know whether that's right or wrong? That's what revelation is. It clarifies this, like both the Quran and Sunnah and everything we get, all of that. Inshallah. Does that make sense? So within that, those commands could be, let's say, in a sense, they could be a test. All right. So what I'm talking about now is like, for instance, Ibrahim alayhi salam. And Ibrahim alayhi salam, when he's commanded to slaughter his son, one of the things you'll notice is that it was what Allah was testing was his submission and his willingness, not the actual act. He doesn't actually go through the actual act, right? So in certain cases, Allah will command someone as a test, not necessarily because the thing itself is moral or immoral. Does that make sense? So that's where how we understand the incident in the life of Ibrahim, right? Of course, he passed the test on others, alayhi salam. Okay, this is another that was part of this moment. All right, any questions? One of them, we can break and move in one section, shall we? So before the break, any questions? Yes.
Well, no, is it un-Islamic for Muslims to have a gun to protect themselves?
This is a great question for Sheikh Aslam. Look, I'm from Texas, so if you ask me, it's going to be a different opinion. I don't know the environment, the culture, and there's so many factors. You'd have to ask, Sheikh Aslam, is it okay for a Muslim to own a gun to protect himself? That's Fahad. I'm going to withhold judgment, like I said. You ask me as being someone from Texas, it's legal there. Many people have it. It's perfectly fine in Texas. Whether it's good in Illinois, whether you should do that, we shouldn't do that culturally, all of that stuff. I'm going to refer that to someone that knows Illinois better than I do.
If someone slaps you,
Yeah.
I have the right to slap them back.
Yeah, although forgiveness is always better. This is what I tell my kids all the time. Anyway, yeah, I'll let Sheikh Asfar handle that one. So, just because again, with these type of questions, you have to be a bit careful with the community that you're with, the people that are around you, what the culture around you is, right? And within the U.S., I find even within the U.S. there's such differences in culture, right? I mean, in Texas, my wife teaches in the public school. All of her, other female teachers, they go out shooting every weekend. The 13-year-olds have guns and stuff. That's like a thing, right? My wife has been on vacation. Let's go shooting. Sure, right? So, but again, some of that stuff you just have to make sure you're careful with, especially something with a gun. You keep it in the house. If you have children, there's so many variables. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay, let's go ahead and break. We'll take about 10 minutes. When is 1:15? Okay, so we have a little time. Okay, so let's break 10 minutes, 11:30. Let's try to come back 11:40, 11:45. One more section.